Today we're jumping straight into something that, well, feels familiar but might be fundamentally different. The federal government shutdown.
Right. It looks like the usual funding crisis on the surface.
Exactly, but the sources we're looking at suggest it's being used differently this time as a kind of strategic lever for much bigger, longer-term changes.
That's the core of it. Our analysis today focuses on how this specific closure, ongoing as October 2nd, isn't just about a budget impasse.
It's about weaponizing the crisis.
Precisely. It's seen as a deliberate political strategy. And the real tell, the phrase that jumped out from the sources, was President Trump calling the standoff an unprecedented opportunity.
Unprecedented opportunity. Wow. Okay, that definitely signals we're past the usual political games, doesn't it?
It really does. It points to that dual conflict you mentioned.
Yeah.
Yes, the immediate scramble to get funding passed, but also this underlying strategic push for permanent changes, maybe even permanent reductions.
So analysts are saying this makes this shutdown potentially more significant than others.
That's the warning, yeah.
Yeah.
Because past shutdowns were often about, squabbles over specific budget lines or policy writers, tactical stuff.
But this time,
It seems explicitly tied to a long-term ambition to fundamentally reshape, maybe even dismantle, parts of the federal government.
okay, let's get right into that strategic blueprint then. Section 1 in our sources really lays out this bigger goal. We're not just talking small trims here.
No, not at all. The goal seems to be identifying whole agencies for potential elimination and aggressively cutting back what President Trump specifically called Democrat-run agencies and programs.
That's pretty direct language, and the sources mention a key meeting, right, with the budget director, Russell Vought.
Yes, that meeting's significant. And Vaught's background is highlighted for a very specific reason. He wasn't just any budget director. He was previously involved with Heritage Foundation's Project 2025.
Okay, help us connect those dots. Why is Vaught's background, specifically Project 2025, so crucial to understanding what's happening now?
Well, Project 2025 isn't just a think tank paper. It's described as a really detailed, comprehensive blueprint, a playbook almost,
A playbook for what, exactly?
for shrinking the federal bureaucracy.
Yeah.
But not just the budget shrinking its power. It talks about things like reclassifying thousands of civil service jobs,
Reclassifying? How?
turning them into political appointments. So a new administration could, theoretically, install loyalists much more quickly and deeply within agencies, redirecting policy almost overnight.
I see. So it's about control as much as cuts.
Exactly. And the blueprint apparently details which agencies to target, how to potentially dismantle them. It's quite methodical.
So linking that back to the shutdown, the delay isn't the problem. The delay is the point. It creates the space, the opportunity to start implementing this restructuring.
That seems to be the argument analysts are making. And you can see it in the actions reportedly already being considered. They aren't necessarily waiting for Congress.
What kind of actions are we talking about?
Well, the sources mention job cuts described as likely in the thousands. And importantly, these aren't just temporary furloughs. The implication is that many of these positions are targeted for permanent elimination.
Thousands of jobs potentially gone for good. And you mentioned targeted funding freezes, too.
Yes, and they seem quite specific, almost politically targeted. Things like transit projects, clean energy initiatives, areas often championed by Democrats or located in blue states.
Why hit those specific areas right now during a shutdown?
It looks like a convergence of policy goals and, well, political strategy. Freezing funds for things like clean energy or high-speed rail sends a clear signal about wanting to reduce the government's role there permanently.
And it also pressures political opponents directly.
Right. It shows that the shutdown isn't just a passive event. It's being actively used to advance specific policy changes outlined in that Project 2025 framework. It's policy reversal through funding denial.
Okay, the strategy seems pretty clear, if controversial. But let's shift to the immediate fallout. Section 2 talks about the human cost, the impact on workers, and public services.
Yeah, and the numbers here are, frankly, stark. We're looking at roughly 2 million federal workers whose pay is suspended.
2 million! That's huge.
It is. And within that, about 750,000 are furloughed, meaning they're actually barred from working. Others are deemed essential and have to work, but without knowing when their next paycheck is coming.
So just massive uncertainty for all those families. And I gather attempts to challenge this legally haven't worked.
That's right. The sources note that union lawsuits trying to block the immediate layoffs or at least guarantee pay haven't succeeded so far. So these workers are really caught in the middle.
Caught between this strategic political fight and just needing to pay their bills, it makes it very real.
It absolutely does. This is where the abstract political maneuvering hits everyday life hard.
So beyond the paychecks, what about the services the public relies on? What's getting disrupted or potentially disrupted?
Well, the sources list several critical areas. There's potential for slowdowns or issues in air travel, think TSA, air traffic control, even if some are essential. Food assistance programs could face delays.
Things people really depend on.
Definitely.
Uh-huh.
Also, federally backed mortgage lending, even the functioning of federal courts could be hampered if it drags on.
And are we already seeing impacts?
Yes. Things like national parks, various social services, they often rely heavily on staff who are now furloughed or on funding streams that are frozen, so they've already had to scale back operations significantly.
And the overall economic picture. The sources mention $1.7 trillion in spending frozen.
Yeah, that's the estimated amount of government spending basically put on ice by this closure. A huge amount of economic activity just stopped.
Now, historically, shutdowns haven't always caused massive long-term economic damage, right? Is this $1.7 trillion freeze more symbolic pain, or is there a bigger risk this time?
That's a really important distinction. You're right, past shutdowns often had temporary economic effects that bounce back. But the analysts seem worried about something different now.
Which is?
It's not just the temporary freeze of that $1.7 trillion, although that's significant. The deeper concern is if the proposed restructuring those thousands of job cuts, the targeting of agencies actually becomes permanent.
So the risk is the long-term instability.
Exactly. If you permanently weaken regulatory agencies or slash infrastructure oversight based on this Project 2025 plan, that creates long-term uncertainty for businesses, for planning. It's the intent behind the freeze that seems more economically dangerous this time.
That completely changes the perspective on risk. Okay, if the strategic goal is that serious and the immediate pain is this widespread, let's talk about the political logjam itself in Section 3. Why can't Congress fix this quickly? Why the expectation it'll drag on?
Well, the core issue seems to be sticking points that aren't strictly about the budget numbers themselves. It's about other policy items being attached.
Like what?
Specifically, Democrats are insisting that any funding bill absolutely must include an extension for expiring Affordable Care Act subsidies. Yeah, the ones that help millions of people afford health insurance.
Okay, so Democrats are drawing a line in the sand on health care. And Republicans.
Well, the Republican leadership, controlling both the House and Senate, according to our sources for this scenario, are flatly refusing to link those ACA subsidies to the government funding bill. They see it as an unrelated issue, maybe a poison pill.
And that creates the stalemate, particularly in the Senate.
Precisely. Even with a majority, Senate rules mean the Republicans likely need 60 votes to overcome procedural hurdles, like a filibuster.
Yeah.
And Senate Democrats have enough votes to block any funding plan that doesn't include those health provisions.
So the Democrats are using Senate procedure to force the health care issue onto the table. If you want the government funded, you have to deal with this too.
That appears to be the dynamic. It's using the leverage of the shutdown deadline to push for a separate policy priority. And the political rhetoric around this is quite pointed.
Yeah, the sources highlight some strong words. Senator Patty Murray, for instance, accusing the administration of essentially using federal workers as bargaining chips, as pawns.
That's the quote. And on the other side, you have the counter-argument from someone like House Speaker Mike Johnson.
What's his justification?
He frames it as a matter of executive authority, basically arguing that if Congress fails to do its job appropriate funds, then the executive branch has the authority, even the duty, to manage the situation, which includes making decisions about spending and operations. He presents the cuts almost as a consequence of legislative failure.
So the disagreement isn't just about policy specifics like ACA or transit funding. It's a fundamental clash over whether using a shutdown like this to force policy changes or implement restructuring is legitimate.
Exactly. Is it a breakdown of the system, or is it a tactic within the system? Democrats see it as holding the government hostage for health care. Republicans frame it as managing the fallout from congressional inaction while pursuing long-stated conservative goals for government size.
Okay, let's put this in historical perspective then. Section 4. Shutdowns happen. The sources say this is the 15th since 1981, so roughly one every few years. Why should we, or you the listener, view this one as potentially different?
That's the key question, right?
Yeah.
Historically, most of those previous 14 shutdowns were, as we said, often about specific spending levels or maybe a controversial policy rider attached to one bill.
Yeah.
They were disruptive, yes, but the government usually restarted and things mostly went back to how they were before. The long-term economic impact was generally seen as limited.
Kind of like a temporary fever, not a chronic condition.
A good analogy.
Mm.
But the warnings now suggest this could be different. It's the explicit connection to that much broader, deeper agenda for structural change, the Project 2025 blueprint.
So it's the scale and the intent that are new.
Precisely. The analysts are basically saying, look, the scale of the proposed agency cuts and restructuring, rooted in this pre-existing plan, could make this standoff far more consequential than just a temporary budget dispute.
Yeah.
It's being viewed not just as a crisis, but as that unprecedented opportunity Trump mentioned.
An opportunity to achieve changes that maybe couldn't pass through normal legislation.
That seems to be the implication. The goal feels less like getting a temporary funding bill passed and more like achieving permanent shifts in the size and scope of government. The intent seems geared towards permanence this time.
Right. So wrapping this up, the big takeaway here seems to be a significant shift in how a government shutdown is being perceived and potentially utilized. It's moving beyond just a temporary tactic to force budget negotiations.
And becoming maybe a more integrated strategic tool, a way to actually implement fundamental long-term restructuring of the federal government, targeting specific policy areas like energy or infrastructure along the way.
It suggests the political playbook has changed. A failure to pass funding might increasingly be seen by some not as a crisis to avoid, but as a window to enact a pre-planned agenda.
It certainly raises that possibility, based on the analysis we've seen.
Which leads to a final thought for you, our listener, to consider. Building on what we've discussed, the potential disruptions, the targeting of agencies, the Project 2025 connection, if a shutdown does become accepted as a tool for implementing major long-term policy shifts outside the regular budget process, what does that do to the whole idea of a legislative mandate, especially when the government is politically divided?
Yeah, how does policy get made if governing requires consensus, but shutdowns offer a path for potentially radical change without it? Something to definitely keep an eye on.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.